There is a difference between a mistake and a choice. A mistake happens in the fraction of a second where the body moves before the mind can catch up. A mistake is forgivable. A mistake is something a team can absorb, address, and move past without leaving a permanent mark. A choice is something else entirely. A choice means the information was there. The call was made. The communication existed. And someone looked at all of that, and decided to go a different way anyway. What happened in the seventh inning wasn't a mistake. That's what made everything that followed so devastating. Not just for the Dodgers. Not just for the game. But for the relationship between two players that was supposed to be built on the most fundamental thing that exists in a team sport. Trust. And when the secret behind the seventh inning was finally revealed, when the word intentionally entered the conversation, everything changed. The Dodgers clubhouse after the game had that specific kind of tension that doesn't announce itself loudly. It wasn't the tension of a team that had been destroyed. It wasn't devastation. It was something quieter and more dangerous than that. It was the tension of a room full of people who knew something had happened, something beyond the baseball, beyond the box score, beyond whatever narrative the broadcast had put around it, and were waiting to see how it would be handled. Players moved carefully. Conversations were short. Eyes went to phones, to lockers, to the floor. Anywhere that wasn't the center of the room. Because in the center of the room, something was coming. Dave Roberts didn't make them wait long. He walked in with the look of a manager who had already made every decision that needed to be made. There was no hesitation in his posture. No sign of a man still working through options. Whatever internal deliberation had happened, and with Roberts, there is always deliberation, it was finished. He spoke clearly. Directly. The way he does when the situation demands that there be no room for misinterpretation. Cal Rushing was being designated for assignment. Immediately. What the public saw in the seventh inning was a breakdown in communication. A missed call. A play that went wrong in the way plays sometimes go wrong in baseball. That was the surface version of the story. The version underneath it was different. In the hours after the game, as the details began to emerge from inside the clubhouse, through the careful, specific language of people who had been in that dugout, who had watched that inning from close range, the real shape of what happened started to come into focus. Otani had made the call. Clear and early. Positioned himself. Done everything the play required of him. His read was right. His communication was right. Everything on his side of the equation was exactly what it needed to be. And Rushing had heard it. That was the part that changed everything. Not that the communication was missed. Not that the stadium noise swallowed the call. Not that Rushing was out of position and simply didn't have the information in time to act on it. He heard it. And he ignored it anyway. Not by accident. Not in the chaotic split-second physics of a ball in the air and two players converging. But deliberately. With the specific, conscious decision to override what his teammate had called and do what he wanted to do instead. When that word reached the rest of the room, intentionally, the air shifted in a way that no box score could ever capture. This wasn't a miscommunication. This was a statement. A statement made in the middle of a live game, at a critical moment, directed at the most important player on the roster. And Shohei Ohtani had felt every word of it. Rushing didn't accept what was coming quietly. That would have been the simpler path. Take the designation. Handle it privately. Let the organization process move forward without adding more weight to an already heavy situation. There was a version of this story where Rushing said nothing, and in saying nothing, preserved at least some portion of his professional reputation. He chose a different path. In the hours following the announcement, through the channels that always exist in professional sports for players who want their version of events heard, Rushing's response began to surface. He said Otani was overreacting. He said the play in the seventh inning was being blown out of proportion. That it was a baseball play. That these things happen. That the response, from Ohtani, from the organization, from Roberts, was disproportionate to what had actually occurred on the field. He said Ohtani was overreacting. Let that sit for a moment. A player who had just been designated for assignment. A player whose decision in the 7th inning had been described, by people who were in that dugout, as intentional. A player who had looked at a clear, correct call from his teammate and chosen to override it. That player was now standing in front of the situation and saying the problem was Ohtani's reaction. Not the action. The reaction. The baseball world absorbed this. And then, almost uniformly, the baseball world rejected it. Because what Rushing was describing as overreacting was actually something much simpler. It was a player with the highest standards in the game refusing to pretend that a deliberate act of disrespect hadn't happened. It was Ohtani holding a line that the entire organization had agreed needed to be held. Overreacting would have been walking off the field. Overreacting would have been a public confrontation that spilled beyond the walls of the clubhouse and into something that couldn't be contained. What Ohtani did was communicate his anger directly, immediately, and honestly. To the person responsible. In the moment it happened. That isn't overreacting. That is exactly how accountability is supposed to work. What came next, what Ohtani said after the designation was announced, after Rushing's response made its way back through the channels it had traveled, was not delivered loudly. It didn't need to be. Ohtani doesn't speak in press conferences the way some players do. He doesn't use the microphone to settle scores or make statements designed to echo across a news cycle. His relationship with public language is careful and deliberate. When he says something, it's because it needed to be said. What he said was short. Never again will you. 3 words before a pause that held longer than it needed to. And then, quietly, the rest of it. Never again will you stand on this field beside me and treat what I say like it doesn't matter. The room that heard it went completely still. Not because of the anger in it. The anger was there, but it was controlled. Directed. It wasn't the anger of a man who had lost his composure. It was the anger of a man who had located exactly where the line was, watched someone cross it deliberately, and was now drawing it again with absolute clarity. This wasn't about one play in one inning of one game. It was about what Ohtani represents on this team. What his preparation represents. What his communication represents. What it means when he makes a call in a live game situation, the call that his preparation has earned him the right to make, and a teammate decides that call isn't worth listening to. Never again. Those 2 words carried the full weight of everything that had happened since the first pitch. The 7th inning. The missed play. The designated for assignment. The accusation of overreacting. All of it collapsed into those 2 words. And in that clubhouse, surrounded by teammates who had witnessed all of it, nobody argued with them. Dave Roberts had managed baseball for long enough to know that there are moments in a season that define what a team is. Not the walk-off wins. Not the comeback victories that get replayed in highlight packages for years. The real defining moments are quieter than that. They happen in the decisions made after losses. In the standards upheld when it would be easier to let something slide. In the way a manager stands in front of his team on a difficult night and makes it absolutely clear what is and is not acceptable. When Roberts was asked about Rushing's comments, about the suggestion that Ohtani had overreacted, he didn't answer immediately. He placed both hands flat on the table in front of him. He looked at the reporter with the patient, level expression of a man who had expected the question and had already decided exactly how much of his answer to give. Then he said it. Shohei has earned the right to be heard on this baseball field. Every single time. He didn't say it loudly. He didn't need to. It landed in the room the way things land when they are simply true. He continued. His voice remained even. What happened in the 7th inning was not a miscommunication. We know that now. And the response from this organization reflects that. A reporter asked if he had spoken to Ohtani directly. Roberts nodded. He didn't need to explain himself to me. I already understood. And then, with the quiet finality that Roberts uses when a conversation is over, he gathered his notes. One last question from the back of the room. Someone asking whether Rushing's comments would change anything about how the designation had been handled. Roberts looked up briefly. His expression didn't shift. His voice didn't change. No. Just the one word. Flat. Absolute. The kind of answer that doesn't invite a follow-up because there is nothing left to follow up on. Cal Rushing is gone. The locker is cleared. The designation is official. What remains is something more complicated than a roster move. What remains is a team that watched its best player get deliberately ignored in a critical moment, and then watched that player respond with exactly the kind of directness and standard that championships are built on. And then watched their manager back every bit of it without hesitation. Rushing called it overreacting. Roberts called it earned. Ohtani called it never again. In a long season full of games and decisions and moments that will blur together by October, this one will stay sharp. Not because of what it cost, but because of what it revealed. About the standard in that clubhouse. About the player at the center of it. About the manager who decided, without pause, which side of the line he was standing on. Never again. That's not a threat. That's a foundation. And on that foundation, the Dodgers will keep building.